In 228 BC, a kingdom known for resilience finally gave way. The state of Zhao had once stood as one of the most formidable rivals to Qin, battle-tested, strategically positioned, and proud of its military tradition. For decades, Zhao resisted expansion from the west. It endured invasion, recovered from catastrophe, and remained a serious obstacle to Qin's ambitions. But history has a way of rewarding preparation over pride. And by 228 BC, resistance alone was no longer enough. The collapse of Zhao did not happen overnight. It was the result of a gradual but unmistakable shift in the balance of power. Qin had spent years strengthening its institutions, refining its military system, and aligning political authority under a unified command. While Zhao struggled with internal division and mounting pressure, Qin advanced with patience and structure. Dominance was not seized in a dramatic charge. It was built step by step. For modern leaders, this moment carries a lesson that extends far beyond ancient battlefields. Markets shift slowly before they tip. Competitors weaken incrementally before they fall. Strategic advantage compounds long before it becomes visible. By the time Zhao's capital was captured, the outcome had already been years in the making. The fall of Zhao was more than another conquest in the Warring States period. It was a decisive phase in Qin's march toward unification under the future First Emperor, Qin Shi Huang. And to understand how empires truly rise, we must look closely at the moment when resistance finally broke. Before its final collapse in 228 BC, Zhao had long been one of the most serious obstacles to Qin's rise. This was not a minor border state destined to disappear quietly. Zhao was a northern military power, hardened by frontier warfare and shaped by constant exposure to steppe incursions. Its cavalry forces were among the most capable of the era, trained for mobility and rapid engagement across difficult terrain. Strategically positioned between Qin and the eastern states, Zhao served as both shield and rival. Any serious attempt by Qin to dominate the Central Plains would inevitably collide with Zhao's defenses. The rivalry between the two states had been forged decades earlier in one of the most infamous clashes of the Warring States period, the Battle of Changping in 260 BC. That confrontation reshaped the political psychology of the age. Though Qin ultimately secured victory, the campaign was brutal and extraordinarily costly. Zhao suffered catastrophic losses, and the execution of surrendered troops left scars that ran deep across generations. Changping was not merely a military encounter, it was a trauma that altered Zhao's demographic strength and strategic confidence. In the years that followed, Zhao struggled to recover fully. Population losses weakened its manpower reserves. Political tensions surfaced within its court. Trust between generals and royal advisors eroded. While Zhao attempted to maintain its standing through defensive measures and shifting alliances, it no longer possessed the same depth of resilience it once had. Meanwhile, Qin did not stagnate. It institutionalized lessons learned from past campaigns, strengthened its administrative control, and refined its merit-based military hierarchy. Over time, a widening strategic gap emerged. Zhao relied increasingly on reaction and preservation. Qin focused on preparation and expansion. By the late 3rd century BC, the contest was no longer balanced. What had once been a rivalry between near equals had become a contest between a structurally ascending power and a state struggling to stabilize. The seeds of Zhao's eventual fall were planted not in a single campaign, but in the long arc of this rivalry, where endurance gradually gave way to structural disadvantage. Military pressure alone rarely destroys a state. More often, the decisive fractures begin from within. By the time Qin renewed its full attention toward Zhao in the late 3rd century BC, the northern kingdom was no longer held together by the internal cohesion that had once sustained it. Zhao's royal court had become increasingly divided by factional politics. Advisors competed for influence, and strategic decisions were often filtered through personal rivalries rather than unified purpose. In periods of stability, political competition can sharpen policy. In moments of existential threat, however, it erodes clarity. While Qin operated under centralized authority with clearly defined chains of command, Zhao's leadership circle struggled to maintain alignment. This instability proved especially dangerous in the treatment of its generals. Capable commanders, some with hard-earned battlefield experience, found themselves undermined by court intrigue. Suspicion replaced trust. Strategic continuity gave way to abrupt changes in leadership. When military professionals are second-guessed by political factions, hesitation creeps into decision-making. Armies sense it, enemies exploit it. Leadership fragmentation compounded the problem. Zhao lacked a consistent, disciplined center of gravity. Authority was technically concentrated in the king, but real influence shifted among competing advisors and power blocks. In contrast, Qin's structure emphasized merit, performance, and direct accountability to central authority. Decisions were coordinated, campaigns sequenced, and objectives clearly prioritized. The result was not immediate collapse but gradual erosion. Internal instability became a strategic vulnerability. Resources were misallocated. Defensive planning lost coherence. Communication between the battlefield and the court weakened. And when external pressure intensified, Zhao lacked the unified command necessary to respond decisively. For modern observers, particularly those who have led organizations through periods of competition, the lesson is familiar. External threats rarely destroy well-aligned institutions. But when political infighting undermines operational leadership, even strong organizations become brittle. Qin did not create Zhao's internal divisions. It recognized them, waited patiently, and applied pressure at precisely the moment those fractures could no longer be contained. By the eve of 228 BC, Zhao was not simply facing a powerful enemy. It was confronting the consequences of its own internal fragmentation, and in strategic contests, that combination is often fatal. While Zhao wrestled with internal strain, Qin operated according to a very different rhythm, one defined not by urgency, but by patience. The leadership in Qin understood that lasting dominance is rarely achieved through impulsive strikes. It is built through controlled escalation, deliberate timing, and institutional consistency. Long before 228 BC, Qin had already begun shaping the conditions that would make Zhao's fall possible. Controlled escalation defined Qin's approach. Rather than launching reckless, all-or-nothing offensives, Qin applied sustained and measured pressure. Border territories were probed. Supply routes were tested. Diplomatic channels were used to isolate Zhao from potential allies. Each move tightened constraints without overextending Qin's own forces. It was pressure calibrated to weaken an opponent gradually while preserving internal stability. In modern strategic terms, it was risk-managed expansion. At the heart of this approach was a merit-based military structure. Advancement in Qin's army did not depend primarily on aristocratic birth, but on performance. Officers earned rank through battlefield achievement. Soldiers were rewarded for measurable contribution. This created incentives aligned with results rather than politics. Over time, such a system produces not only capable commanders but institutional confidence. Orders are respected because competence is visible. Underlying the military structure was the broader framework of legalist discipline. Laws were codified, expectations clear, and penalties enforced with consistency. To modern sensibilities, such rigidity may seem harsh. Yet from a structural standpoint, it produced predictability. Farmers knew their quotas. Soldiers knew their obligations. Administrators understood their accountability. Discipline was not selective, it was systemic. This combination generated structural superiority. Qin's strength did not rest solely on troop numbers or charismatic leadership. It rested on alignment between policy and execution, between command and compliance, between ambition and preparation. When campaigns were launched, they were supported by logistics, governance, and coordinated planning. For viewers who have built businesses or led teams over decades, the pattern is recognizable. Sustainable advantage rarely comes from a single bold move. It emerges from systems that consistently reinforce performance and reduce friction. By the time Qin advanced decisively against Zhao, the outcome was shaped less by sudden brilliance than by years of disciplined preparation. Strategic patience had quietly matured into overwhelming leverage. By 229 BC, the long buildup gave way to decisive action. Qin's leadership determined that the moment had arrived to convert structural advantage into irreversible conquest. What followed was not a reckless surge, but a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to dismantle Zhao piece by piece. The offensives were coordinated across multiple fronts. Qin forces advanced methodically, targeting key defensive positions rather than chasing symbolic victories. Communication between commanders remained disciplined, and movements were sequenced to prevent Zhao from concentrating its remaining strength in any single location. This was not chaos on a battlefield, it was a controlled tightening of pressure. Strategic cities were isolated before they were attacked. Supply routes were severed. Reinforcements were intercepted. Strongholds that once provided Zhao with depth of defense became liabilities as they were cut off from one another. In modern terms, Qin disrupted the network before confronting the nodes. Once cities were separated from logistical support, resistance weakened rapidly. Timing amplified the impact. Zhao had recently suffered from natural disasters, earthquakes and famine that strained resources and morale. Food shortages eroded civilian stability. Troop provisions became inconsistent. Qin's leadership understood that war is fought not only with weapons but with endurance. By launching its final push during a period of internal strain, Qin ensured that Zhao would struggle to sustain prolonged defense. The campaign reached its climax with the fall of Handan, Zhao's capital. When Handan was captured, the symbolic and administrative heart of the kingdom stopped functioning. The king was taken. Central command disintegrated. What remained of organized resistance fractured into scattered pockets, incapable of coordinated response. For seasoned leaders watching today, the pattern is unmistakable. The final victory often appears sudden, but it is the result of preparation, sequencing, and timing. Zhao did not collapse because of a single dramatic confrontation. It fell because its defenses were systematically dismantled, its resources exhausted, and its cohesion undermined. By 228 BC, the state of Zhao ceased to exist as an independent power. And with its fall, Qin moved one decisive step closer to reshaping the entire political order of the age. The destruction of Zhao in 228 BC was more than a territorial gain for Qin. It was a psychological rupture across the entire warring state's landscape. Zhao had once stood as a credible counterweight to Qin's expansion. It was not a minor state brushed aside in passing. It was a former rival with a record of real resistance. When such a power is eliminated, the message travels farther than any army. For the remaining states, Wei, Yan, Chu, and Qi, the fall of Zhao signaled that a threshold had been crossed. A former rival had been removed from the board. This was no longer a contest of shifting alliances and temporary victories. It was beginning to look like consolidation under a single dominant force. Fear became a strategic weapon. Qin did not need to broadcast threats. The evidence spoke for itself. Zhao had resisted for decades and still fell. Its capital had been taken. Its king captured. Its armies dissolved. Leaders in neighboring courts could not ignore the implications. Every strategic calculation now included a sobering question. If Zhao could not withstand Qin, who could? Momentum began to work in Qin's favor in a way that transcended battlefield metrics. The perception of inevitability started to take hold. In competitive environments, whether geopolitical or corporate, perception often shapes reality. Potential allies hesitate when they doubt collective strength. Rivals second-guess their own resilience. Coalitions that might have formed earlier become fragile or delayed. Qin's victories created not only physical expansion but psychological gravity. Regional power dynamics shifted accordingly. States that once viewed Zhao as a buffer now faced Qin more directly. Diplomatic strategies were recalibrated. Some considered accommodation, others contemplated resistance. Yet the window for unified opposition was narrowing. Momentum compounds. Each success reinforced the next, not only materially but emotionally. For modern viewers who have observed market consolidation or geopolitical realignments, the pattern is familiar. Once a dominant player demonstrates consistent capacity to remove serious competitors, the environment changes. Risk assessments shift. Partnerships realign. Confidence flows towards strength. Zhao's fall did not simply reduce the number of states. It altered the psychology of the age. And in strategic contests, that psychological shift can be as decisive as any army in the field. The fall of Zhao was not simply a military milestone. It marked a transition from sustained warfare to unmistakable imperial trajectory. At the center of that shift stood King Jing of Qin, the ruler who would later become Qin Shi Huang. His leadership was defined less by dramatic battlefield presence and more by long-term clarity. He did not wage war for revenge or prestige. He pursued consolidation with methodical intent. Zhao's elimination was not an endpoint. It was a calculated phase in a larger design. King Zheng's vision extended beyond defeating rivals. He sought structural unification, centralized authority, standardized administration, and durable governance. While individual generals executed campaigns, the strategic arc remained consistent at the highest level. This distinction matters. Personal heroics may win battles, but institutional power sustains dominance. Qin's strength derived from systems, merit-based advancement, codified law, coordinated logistics, not from a single charismatic commander. With Zhao removed, the pace of events accelerated. What had once required careful probing began to resemble controlled inevitability. The northern flank was secured. Strategic depth expanded. Resources increased. Each conquest created conditions for the next. Momentum compounded, reinforcing both confidence within Qin and apprehension among remaining states. In modern terms, this is the difference between opportunistic growth and scalable expansion. Leaders who think transactionally focus on the next win. Leaders who think institutionally build frameworks that make repeated success possible. Qin exemplified the latter. Its campaigns were sequenced, its objectives prioritized, and its governance integrated after each victory. For contemporary leaders, whether running companies, managing investments, or guiding organizations through competitive environments, the lessons are clear. Long-term vision must align with operational discipline. Structural alignment outperforms emotional reaction. And momentum, once established, should be reinforced rather than squandered. Zhao's fall illustrates how dominance transitions from contest to consolidation. It was not the loudest moment in Qin's rise, but it was among the most consequential. The pathway to empire was no longer theoretical. It had become practical, structured, and increasingly irreversible. When resistance ends, history does not pause, it accelerates. The fall of Zhao in 228 BC marked the conclusion of a long and bitter rivalry, but more importantly, it signaled that the balance of power had shifted beyond recovery. Zhao had endured hardship, survived earlier devastation, and stood for decades as a credible counterweight to Qin. Yet endurance without structural adaptation has limits. When those limits were reached, the collapse was swift. What followed was not chaos, but consolidation. With Zhao removed, the pathway toward unification became increasingly inevitable. The remaining states could see the pattern unfolding. Qin was not acting impulsively, it was executing sequential empire building, removing one rival at a time, absorbing territory, integrating administration, and reinforcing momentum. By the time unification was formally declared under Qin Shi Huang and the establishment of the Qin dynasty, the decisive groundwork had already been laid. For modern leaders, the lesson resonates clearly. Transformational outcomes rarely emerge from a single bold moment. They are constructed through disciplined sequencing, institutional strength, and strategic patience. Competitors fall not simply because they are attacked, but because they fail to adapt while others build durable systems. Momentum, once earned, compounds, until resistance gives way to inevitability. In today's competitive landscape, whether in business, geopolitics, or innovation, the same principles apply. Vision must be paired with execution. Strength must be reinforced by structure. And perhaps most importantly, decisive moves must be made before the window closes. If this exploration of ancient strategy has offered insight into how power consolidates and empires rise, consider subscribing to the channel. We dive deep into the pivotal moments that reshaped civilizations and uncover the strategic lessons that still apply today. Because sometimes, understanding how resistance ended centuries ago can sharpen the decisions we face right now.